Hi, good evening, everyone. It's Wednesday, May 19th, 2021, and it's 8 p.m. and time for our sips and spotlights. And I just realized I don't have a drink in front of me because I was just drinking at a reception here, finishing up a very special day with the American Society of Travel Advisors, also known as ASTA. It was a very interesting day. There were events yesterday as well, actually, even on Monday. So it's been a busy couple of days. But I wanted to give you a report live from Washington. I've wanted to say that all my life. So at one point, I wanted to be a reporter. So I'm actually in Washington and I'm coming to you live with a report on some activities on Capitol Hill today. Yes, there were some other things going on the Hill. I know today about the January 6th commission. And as a result, some of our meetings that were scheduled did not happen. But basically, what today is about, and I participated in the one in 2019, or sorry, in 2020 as well, in February of 2020. And what today is a chance for travel advisors to come to Washington and talk to our representatives about the issues that are affecting our industry. Last year, interestingly enough, it was about Real ID and getting an extension on Real ID because people were going to have problems getting on planes if they didn't have the Real ID. And they wanted an extension on that. Seems so quaint in retrospect, given what we've all been through. And that was the first week of February that this occurred. This year, there were three specific asks that every delegation made for the representatives. So basically what they did is they brought us all together. There was some training last week, and then they brought us all together today, and they talked about a couple of things. The issue substantively, what it's like to work on the Hill, and kind of inspiring us to kind of go out there. And they divided all of us up into literally delegations by state. So I was the only rep from DC. And so I was grouped in with those from Virginia. We were actually one of the larger groups. I think the largest that I know of, maybe Florida was bigger, but we had 12. I know North Carolina had 8, but I understand that Florida was large and rambunctious and hopefully persuasive. So it was an interesting day and an interesting session, to say the least, and I hope effective. The three issues were basically three different bills. One was a bill called Securing Access for Venue Equity, which is the acronym for SAVE. Already in the appropriations bill that finished up 2020, Congress appropriated. Yes, Florida is rambunctious. Amy just commented, sounds like Florida. Florida is rambunctious. The SAVE Act. Sorry, that's not the one. Yeah, SAVE. I don't know why it's called SAVE. Oh, the original bill that appropriated the money was called SAVE. This one is called the Shuttered Venue Operations Grant. And it's only been proposed in the House. They're trying to get somebody to propose it in the Senate. And basically what it does is it takes money that's already been appropriated for this grant program under the Small Business Association that was created for venues, so like concert halls and entertainment, amusement parks, that kind of thing, and gave them grants to survive during the pandemic. And I think the thinking is that it was just an oversight. The travel advisors were not included in that because we're the ones who get the people to the venue by booking their flights and getting them the hotels and often even buying the tickets as well. So it's a simple ask because we weren't asking for any money. The money's already been appropriated. It's undersubscribed. The venues that are eligible to apply haven't applied. And so we basically were asking them to pass this bill to allow us to be recategorized and eligible then for this grant program. So that was the first thing that we asked about. And in order to bridge the gap, because even people that are booking now trips now won't travel until 2022. And so there's even a longer gap in terms of revenue that would be coming in, more so than a concert hall, which immediately, they sell the tickets and people go, usually within, a month or two beforehand. So that was the very first one that we asked for, and we had to educate them. Like most of the public, a lot of the people who work on the Hill don't understand what travel advisors do. And so we educated them a little bit about that. I was in kind of in a unique position because I've worked on the Hill. So I've been that 25-year-old on the other side listening to these kinds of pitches. So I understand how it works. I was able to ask a couple of good questions in the general session. That was fun. They didn't really have a good answer for one of my questions, but it was all good. And then we broke up into these groups. So that was the first ask, was to help them, help us get eligible for these small business loan grants to bridge us over the next couple of months until things really ramp up. The second thing that they asked us to talk about was, and this was really interesting, and I asked a good question about this one too. There's a strange law from 1886 that basically says that a ship that's a foreign registered, which all of them are, can't stop in the United States unless it's it prohibits foreign flagged vessels from sailing directly between U.S. ports. So basically, that means that a ship that is registered in the Bahamas or wherever can't go from Seattle to Alaska without stopping in Canada. And it's created a catch-22 because this law is still in effect from 1886, 135 years ago, because Canada will not allow ships to dock. Not even dock and not let any people off. It won't let them dock. So with Canada not allowing any ships to stop, and this law from 1886, it's a catch-22. So they basically have asked for an exception that would sunset when Canada reopened and allowed ships to dock, or 2028, I think. And I asked, what was the reason for the original law? Why is this law there to begin with? Not necessarily arguing that we should try to get it off the books now, but I said, what was the rationale then? And is that something that's still animating that a staff member might think to come back at us and say, no, we don't want to make an exception to this law because this was the reason for it, because I didn't understand the reason for it. And they postulated, they had looked it up, and they think it was because of ferries. Obviously the cruise industry didn't exist 135 years ago, so they really didn't know what the background was on that. So that was sort of interesting, and I asked about that. So ships with less than 100 passengers are exempt, but that really doesn't help. And what was most interesting about that is that it passed the Senate already last week by unanimous consent, which just means that basically nobody objected. But it hasn't moved in the House, even though it was proposed by a Congressman, Don Young from Alaska, who's a Republican, who's been there forever. And if he introduced it and he wanted it done, it would have gotten done. So the question is, why was he dilly-dallying? Why wasn't he making this happen? It was going to help Alaska. Actually, it's going to help the entire travel industry because every state sends people to Alaska for these cruises. So we made the argument that it wasn't just about Alaska tourism. It wasn't just about the cruise industry. It was really about travel advisors across the country who send their clients to Alaska for these cruises. So it passed the Senate last Thursday on the 13th by unanimous consent. So it should be, and the fact that it passed means that it should pass the House. But it hasn't happened yet, and it has to happen like yesterday because otherwise this next coming summer will be lost. The travel industry said it would take them 4 weeks to ramp up, and if this didn't pass until even mid-June, they were like saying it needs to pass like this week, next week, at the latest, the end of May, or there'd be no cruise industry in Alaska in 2021 either. So we said to them, this should be an easy ask because it passed through Senate by unanimous consent, and easy and also urgent. So that was our job, was to say this needs to happen immediately. And in fact, not one but two staffers said, well, if Don Young is on this, why, do you know why he hasn't pushed it? And they hadn't prepared us to answer that question. It was a good question. So I'll see if I can find out what the answer is. And then the last one was the one that was most interesting to me because it was a tax incentive for businesses to restart business travel. So to give businesses a tax credit for certain domestic travel expenses for them to start planning conferences and in-person meetings and events. so that would help stimulate the business travel industry and maybe help with revenue in hotels, and to give tax credits for the cost of attending the meetings and also setting up the meetings. So that was part of it. The other half is to give a tax credit to people for domestic, or for leisure travel rather. So up to $1,500 for most Americans. It would be limited. If you're an individual, you couldn't earn more than $75,000 per year. If you're a couple, you couldn't earn more than 150. So the goal is to get more lower and middle class Americans to travel. And the person who briefed us on that gave us a couple of statistics that I articulated back to the staffers. One was that without this stimulus and incentivizing of travel, that travel would not return to 2019 levels until 2025. So that's a pretty dramatic delay and a reason to do it. Another statistic that was articulated and given to us in the briefing was that in 2018, over 700 million vacation days went unused in the United States. I don't know if you remember that, because it made kind of a big splash on the news. So I said, not only would you be helping us in our industry to sustain our businesses and to incentivize people to plan travel and to travel domestically even until Europe opens up, but you would be helping a lot of Americans use up their unused vacation days. And we all know that travel is good for their mental health. And that seemed to resonate. There was one staffer who said, yeah, we're talking a lot about mental health here and about the suicide rates as well in the United States. And I, tied it into the fact that I did wellness travel, and so that was actually really fun to do and to talk about. And that was not something that was actually typed up on our briefing paper, but I took good notes during the in-person briefing and kind of added an extra personalized spin for that bill specifically. One person we spoke to, the last person, actually her congressperson is on Ways and Means and would literally have the means to get it, pun intended, slipped into a law. Nowadays, when I worked on the Hill 30 years ago, you could get individual bills passed. That doesn't happen anymore. It's too contentious. So basically everything gets rolled up into some omnibus bill or some big thing that they have to pass, and then everybody and their mother is throwing whatever they want as riders through. It helps if the bill has a lot of co-sponsors, so which is basically when a congressman says, yes, I support this. So we were basically asking each of them to support and co-sponsor each of these three initiatives, one of which it wasn't even relevant anymore in the Senate because it passed last Thursday. So it was really interesting. They gave the person, we had a leader for our group. Every group had a leader, so they gave just general information about what the American Society of Travel Advisors is. Somebody Googled ASTA, and they also found out there's the Arkansas State Teachers Association with the same acronym, which I thought was funny. They talked about the devastation to the travel industry, the 82% in lost revenue, business down in 2020, which is crazy big, right? But the point was made that while some businesses, restaurants, for example, the business will come back and they'll, you serve somebody a meal and they pay for it right away. That for a lot of travel advisors, especially those who don't charge service fees, who I think are crazy, that if they're relying strictly on commissions and that's their business model, they won't get paid until that person goes on the trip. So they sort of wanted to stress that lag time, which was really kind of unusual and distinct to the travel industry. So while 82% is a big number, the other big thing is that it's 8 to 10 months that before sometimes the time that you spend investing in planning a trip for a client before you get any revenue from that for that time to pay you for that time. Again, I think that the business model for the travel industry is going to change for that reason. There are some vendors that are paying out some of their commissions early or even extra commissions. I've heard some of them are doing that. Again, that's not what I do. I don't make choices based on commissions. I'm not an intermediary. I am a matchmaker. I become a specialist in the industry. I am a specialist in the industry. I get to know the best suppliers to work with, and I become a specialist in you and in my clients, and I become then a matchmaker, and I match you up for you having a very satisfying experience. We had a final dinner tonight, which was kind of interesting. They gave away, still, like 40 years later, they're giving away Ronald Reagan jelly beans, which I thought was crazy and kind of funny. And they had an interesting themed Washington meal. So they had different presidents mentioned here. I don't know if you can see that. So John Quincy Adams, Thomas Jefferson, Herbert Hoover, and Ronald Reagan all like to wine down, whereas George Washington, George H.W. Bush, and Barack Obama enjoyed a cold one at the end of the day. So it was cute. It was like very much of my old life in Washington. I made a lot of great connections. I met the editor-in-chief of Insider Travel Report. I had some wonderful conversations with both Matthew Upchurch and Cheryl Bunker and Wendy Abrams of Virtuoso, all wonderful people that I've heard of and benefited from their work over the last year and some months. The other people that were in my delegation were very interesting to meet. I met the woman who's head of the chapter for our region for the American Society of Travel Advisors, so I'm going to get more involved in that, and that was really awesome. And yeah, it was a really productive time. I gave a donation to the PAC to support my industry as well last week rather, and we'll continue to stay involved. They do a lot of things. ASTA has a very strong education program, and they also sponsor trips for travel advisors to go and get to know different parts of the world. They're going to Budapest next year. I think they're going to Croatia this year. And it's a great way to, go and experience a place so that you can speak intelligently and from experience about a destination. But also it's a great way to spend time with your colleagues. This was really wonderful as well. The co-founder of Gifted Travel Network, as well as the community outreach person, so that would be Vanessa and Shannon, also were able to get up on stage, and they talked about something coming up that they're working on October 19th. They have a day where they promote ASTA Awareness Day. So within the industry, even a lot of travel advisors don't understand what it is that ASTA does beyond their education. It's a big deal to say that you've gone through some of their education programs, but they also have this very important part of their mission is to sort of help represent the industry in Washington. One thing that they didn't touch on, and I understand why they didn't, because we were dealing with Congress today, and this is really something that's administrative, so it's a different branch of the government. It would be under the administration of President Biden. I almost said Obama, President Biden, and really with the CDC and the State Department. And well, yes, even this other aspect of it would be under the administration. But and this came up yesterday in the press conference that I attended at the National Press Club here in Washington on 14th Street. And that is that one of the biggest difficulties and the thing that's going to give us the biggest hiccups is the lack of consistency. So the example was given that somebody who came from New York and who has a card, because New York has one of the apps, the vaccine passports, that says you're vaccinated. She travels 4 hours south on a train, and in DC it's not recognized, and she has to go through hoops. And also the fact that different states are opening in different times and in different ways, that this patchwork and lack of consistency is going to continue to inhibit travel, because the consistency breeds trust, and inconsistency makes people not decide to just stay home. So they didn't talk about that at all on a state by state kind of quagmire, but it's also true internationally. And while I do still continue to be optimistic that things will shake down into one or two different apps that will be used universally, that's something that only the State Department can do to work towards and work for the United States. And that's really the only thing that's really going to make it easy and consistent for us to travel internationally, is if there's one way to get on a plane, one way to get off a plane, and no people like me don't have to spend a lot of time researching all the nuances. And again, it's not just about, what country you're from and where you want to go to. If you want to, there was one very prominent travel advisor gave an example of a client who was used her many times, who said, I don't want to bother you. That's why I spoke 2 weeks ago about please bug me. You're never bugging or bothering a travel advisor. But she had went ahead and booked her own flight and a hotel stay in Portugal and is going to spend more other days in Spain. And it was pointed out to her that those borders are not necessarily open. So it's not just about like where you're from and where you're going. It's if you're transiting through a different country. Here's another example. I'm going to Morocco on Sunday. I would have loved to have gone through Spain or gone through France to go to Morocco. Maybe spend a couple of days in either one of those places, one on the way there and one on the way back. Well, guess what? Morocco is accepting planes direct from the United States. You can transfer, but you can't get off and then go to Morocco. They're not accepting flights from Spain or France right now. So it's not about where you're from and where you're going. It's also where you've transited through that may inhibit your ability to land and enter a destination that you want to go to. They talked about quarantines, that they're still different all over the place. So it's interesting. Here, one other interesting tidbit I want to share with you about domestic travel. I had heard 2 or 3 weeks ago that somebody was on the phone with a supplier and they heard somebody else in the background say, "Oh my God." And it turned out what they had just been told is that there were no rental cars available for the entire rest of the summer in Alaska. I mean, summer hasn't even officially started. We're not even past Labor Day. No rental cars available at all in Alaska. Because even if you can't cruise there, people were going to fly there and see Alaska driving around. Then I heard today that in Hawaii, to rent a car, because they just don't have the fleet, it's $2,000 a day. So there were people who were planning on going to Hawaii, and when they couldn't afford the rental car because the price has gone up because the demand is higher than the supply. Also, anything on the East Coast that you want to go to that's luxurious to rest and enjoy this summer, pretty much all booked. There's just not the inventory here in the United States either because Americans are used to going abroad, I guess, for their vacations. So, lesson being, if you want to go anywhere anytime soon or anytime in the foreseeable future, you need to start thinking about that now. I also happen to know, and I know this has been talked about a lot, that South Africa, which has been open to Americans for a couple of months now, now's the time to go. You can't go in 2022. There's no room anywhere. And 2023 is when people are looking to book at this stage, unless you can go immediately. So just something else to keep in mind, that if you're thinking about travel, to start planning now. I don't know. Does anybody have any questions about my report from Washington? This is really a fun day for me because it mixed my love of politics. It's why I live in D.C. is because I love politics and my love for travel. And I loved talking to people on the Hill. I think they're very admirable people because they could all be making a lot of money elsewhere. And again, I used to be one of those 25-year-olds on the receiving end of these pitches. And they sincerely do want to help. It was some of the attendees, I think they didn't realize that it's actually better and more effective to talk to a staff person than the actual congressman or senator. They think that if they're talking to a staff, they're being passed off. But in fact, it's usually the staffers that make things happen. Nine times out of 10, that things happen on the staff level. The one question I asked in the first session was, do we know what committees they're on and which committees have jurisdictions over these bills? And that came up in the last meeting when she said, oh yeah, my boss is on the Ways and Means Committee. They handle all tax issues. And that would have been helpful to know, to be able to say at the beginning, well, we know your congressman is on the Ways and Means Committee, and so we would love his help to get this up and reported out of committee so that it can pass on the floor. Because that's the process. You get co-sponsors, and that just tells the leadership that a lot of people support this. But the way things really happen is that they introduce the bill in the subcommittee, it gets reported up to the full committee, then it gets passed out of the full committee and onto the floor, and then it's eligible to be on the floor. But again, most things don't pass unless it's folded into a big omnibus bill, usually a spending bill, because they just want to keep the government open, and that's when everything sort of gets thrown into the pot. And that's pretty much the way only the things get passed now. So the next one that's going to be like that is probably the infrastructure bill. And we don't know what the timing of that is, but none of these are going to become law as standalone laws. It's going to be because somebody in the know who knows when and how to get it in without objection attaches it, and that's how it happens. So we will see. It was again a good couple of days. I enjoyed hanging out in person with my colleagues. It was super exciting to be able to do that. I hosted a wonderful cocktail party here in my apartment here in Washington for them on Monday night. We did a fabulous boat cruise on the Potomac afterwards as the sun set. Also fabulous. I've been here for 35 years. I've never done anything quite like that. I've rowed on the Potomac, but never been in a boat quite like that. And it was really fun to have a fresh perspective to do that. And then yesterday, I had a very productive morning with some colleagues, and then went to the press conference and some more social events and networking. And it was really a lot of fun. So thank you for tuning in. Thank you, Amy, for your support and your gratitude. I hope I explained everything well. Next week, Wi-Fi willing, I will be reporting to you from the Four Seasons Hotel in Casablanca, and I'm super excited about it. It will be earlier, though, because of that. Instead of at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, I will be going live at 5 p.m. I think they're 4 hours ahead, so I think it's 9 o'clock their time. You can always go to our Premier Wellness Travel website. There's a navigation for events, and you can just go there to see the timing and the link to watch it live next week. I will be letting you know what it's like there, what it's like to travel. I almost forgot how to pack. I'll be working on that the next few days, trying to remember what it was that I used to wear on an airplane to be comfortable. Everybody's sort of talking about that, and I'm very excited about the trip. I'm also going to be, so I'll be there for 4 days in Casablanca at the Four Seasons, and then going on a hosted trip with my travel network, Gifted Travel Network, for about 10 days. So from the 28th, I think, to the 4th. And we're going to be going to Fez, the Sahara Desert. We're going to see like their Grand Canyon, and then spend time in Marrakesh, finish up in Marrakesh. And then they'll all leave, and I'm tacked on a few extra days also at the back end, and I'm going to be staying at the Amman Resort in Marrakesh, which I'm also very excited about. So hopefully next week, Wi-Fi willing, I will be reporting live from Casablanca, and then the following week from Marrakesh, and then I will be returning on the following Wednesday as well. So stay tuned. Thanks for watching, and wish me well. Bon voyage. See you next week, hopefully. Bye.